Hello there, good evening and welcome to Spectrum Debate number 4, whether you're watching on YouTube, Google Plus or elsewhere. Tonight, each of our guests has picked a topic for us to debate and they will introduce their topic and then we will debate it. In a few moments, I'm going to introduce each of them to you, but we want to hear your views and we want you to send in questions or points to challenge each of our guests. You can do so on Twitter using the hashtag SpectrumDebate, singular, or if you're watching on Google Plus, you can use the Q&A feature, and I'll do my best to put your questions to our guests and to let all of our viewers know what it is you are thinking. If you're watching on Google Plus, and there should be a link to that somewhere down here on YouTube, you can also use the applause app, which tells us how much you agree or disagree with what's being said at any particular moment in time. So without further ado, let me introduce our guests to you, and then we'll find out what their topics are. Our first guest tonight is John Mousley. He describes himself as a heavy tea drinker and a medievalist. He has an irrational dislike of cities, he reads, cycles and games far too much. He describes himself as a pansy conservative and a vegetarian still. Don't know how he manages that. He's a supporter of UKIP and broadcasting tonight from Aberystwyth, where he's studying a Masters in Medieval History. You can find him on Twitter at LessFox. Good evening, John.
Evening.
Next is Sam Clark. Sam is an electronic engineer, blogger and podcaster. He's broadcasting tonight from Manchester. He's also a supporter of the Pirate Party UK and will be their candidate in the May general election in the Salford and Eccles constituency. You can tweet him at @followsound_. Good evening, Sam.
Evening.
Our next guest is Rob Telford. He's a Green Party activist and an elected member of Bristol City Council. On the council, he's involved in, amongst many other things, planning and scrutiny. He describes himself as a social democrat, and you can contact him, especially if you're in his ward, at Green Rob Telford. Good evening, Rob.
Hi there.
Liam Dodd is our next guest. He's also broadcasting from Wales. He describes himself as a scientist, pluralist, physicist and freedom of knowledge activist. He's not a supporter of any particular party. On Twitter you will find him at Audioworm. Good evening, Liam.
Good evening.
And our final guest today, standing in at the last minute because Dylan had some technical issues, is Cameron Singh. He's an economist and politics student at Aberystwyth University, describes himself as broad-minded, relaxed, ambitious. He's into 60s and 80s pop, rock. He's an audiophile and a comedy lover. He's half Indian and a libertarian-leaning Tory optimist, and you can find him at Cameron Singh CL. Good evening, Cameron.
Good evening, sir.
Now,
I hope this is my first debate. I hope it's a good one.
Oh, don't you? Well, hopefully we'll make it as good as we possibly can. I'm Gareth. I'm your host tonight, and for full disclosure, I am a conservative, but I'll do my best to play devil's advocate and to challenge all of our guests tonight. Our standard disclaimer, of course, is that whilst our guests may support a party, none of them speaks for or on behalf of that party. Please take everything they say tonight as being their own personal opinion. Of course, if you would like to appear here next week or in future, get in touch. DM Spectrum Debates and reserve your place. We really do want to welcome as many people from as many different backgrounds and views as we can. We will begin by asking our first guest to introduce their topic. This was drawn at random before the show, and the winner was Liam. Liam, can you tell us your topic, please, and then introduce it to our guests?
So I wanted to look at electoral reform, and basically in the sense of the way that we elect our representatives in Parliament. So the current system, as most of you will be aware, is first past the post, which is a general system in which the person who has the most votes is the representative at the end of the day. And in my personal view, I view the first past the post system as massively problematic in the sense that it favours the mainstay parties at the expense of everyone else. Not just in the sense that like smaller parties don't get as much say anyway, but in the fact that you often end up voting against a party rather than for a party. So my personal view with the AV vote we had recently was an absolute travesty when it came to how it was represented in the media, and the view that was given of it was just, effectively in my view, basically lying to the people about what AV was. Because for me, AV is a far better system because no matter what you do, your vote counts. So let's say for example that I live in a very Tory stronghold. So for me, I'm massively I'm a very left-wing person. So there's very little reason for me to vote because my vote is viewed as not counting because I'll just lose anyway, effectively. But if I say well, I want to vote for this party that I actually like, that a small party, but when they don't win, it means that I've shown that I support this party, but I then could vote for the next left-wing party and the next one to ensure that my vote always continues. So does anyone here either agree that with the first past the post system or AV or any other electoral reform systems, or not agree there's a problem at all?
Thank you very much indeed, Liam. Who'd like to open us on this one?
I can start on this one. Yeah.
Fire away, Rob.
I'm a huge proponent of democratic reform, and I'm really glad you've brought it up because it was what I wanted to talk about originally, actually, and then I've just changed my subject. But the reason I want to talk about it is because it's imperative. It's the be-all and end-all of British politics. We have a system that's broken, and we need a better system, one that actually gives the right weight to the things that people actually want to vote for. At the moment, as already been said, we have this system where we just vote for the worst of the least worst of two options, which is ridiculous. So for me, it's the best system for me on the national level is the additional member system, which is what they use in Germany. So it's a system where you have first past the post is kept, so that actually appeases people who are first past the post supporters. But you top up seats probably on a regional basis to give you a proportional parliament, and that would fully support the aims. I mean, my party, the Green Party, would have 30, 40 MPs if we had, that 5%, 6% that we're getting in the polls represented in Parliament. So it's an absolutely imperative thing for the future of our democracy.
Thank you very much indeed. Let me just give you a couple of the comments that we've had so far. Quite apart from a few people here saying there are far too many Welsh-based guests, but those are John's friends who are making that point. Gavin at Blue Liberal is saying, give me single transferable vote or give me death, brackets, I'll accept AMS. And Adam Hawks at the Adam Hawks has tweeted, for anyone interested, CGP Grey does many videos on voting styles on YouTube. Anyone else like to comment on this, please?
I think I'm going to completely agree with Rob, to be honest. I'm a big fan of the AMS voting system, to be honest. First past the post worked when there were far fewer parties and far more people voted for one of the two major parties. We've now reached a point where one of the two major parties isn't making 30% of the vote, and there is a huge number of people voting for different types of people. And AMS would solve that problem instantly. We could still have strong local MPs that you could vote for on your local issues. Then you could still vote for your heart in a different way for an MP to represent the country from a party you really wanted. So I think I agree with Will completely. It represents the best of both worlds. Though, to hand it to some people, I wouldn't totally mind single transferable vote if it came to it.
Let me put this to the three of you who've spoken so far. Is this decrying of first past the post and this demand for electoral reform not just the cry of those who can't win under the current system?
Yes, it is, yeah.
Way to run a democracy?
No, it doesn't, because it's not about winning. If it was about winning, why is democracy about winning? It's about the debate. I mean, tonight we're debating issues which is imperative for our democracy, and that's what a proportional system does. It gives you a flavour of a number of different parties. It doesn't make you see it as this sort of winner-takes-all mentality, which I think is retrograde. It's a way of seeing politics as a game, and it shouldn't be a game. It should be something where we get together and discuss the issues and decide on the best course of action. So actually, I don't think the model of democratic politics that we've had in this country for hundreds of years is actually democratic at root.
I disagree slightly. This isn't those who can't be elected moaning. I mean, UKIP and the Green Party and other minor parties have all elected people to Parliament. The problem is, it's either not enough or it's not fairly balanced.
Well, from our side, we always get said, people tell us why do you bother standing, why do you bother doing anything, because you can't win. And I think the first past the post system kind of keeps that going, in that people feel disenfranchised with the politics and feel that why bother because the incumbent's going to get in anyway. But I think doing things like this as well, we can show that you can really make a difference without being in those seats. But I think having things like safe seats are quite dangerous for politics because it really disenfranchises people and makes people switch off.
Now that would militate against keeping using AMS, wouldn't it? Because you still have safe seats. And in fact, worse, let's take Germany. In the elections that took place in the late 90s, where the CDU under Helmut Kohl lost the election, he lost his parliamentary seat, but he got back in on the top-up. Doesn't that cause some difficulties if people say, well, we're going to vote against candidate A because we don't like him or her, and the party then just slips them back in on the top-up? Anyone?
I think that's actually not that much of a good criticism, really, because, as you said, Helmut Kohl may have lost his constituency seat, but he certainly had his supporters in other seats who voted for the list. You know, he may have lost a lot of support in the area that he represented as a geographical area, but he was certainly, not, despised throughout Germany. He still represented, quite a good chunk of the population. So why deny him the seat? That's
Fair
my
enough.
view on that.
Now, Cameron, what's your view on this topic in general, and as someone who is a supporter of one of the parties that's benefited from this for a long time?
Well, I think, no, in theory, I think single transferable vote or additional member systems would be a fantastic, that would actually improve the quality of governance in this country and make the debate more democratic. But I think there's a real problem in Britain with, do people actually enjoy being governed by, executive cabinets that are coalitions between one or two parties? I mean, if you look at the Westminster government these last 4.5 years, look at how the Liberal Democrats have been crucified by their supporters in the media just for doing something that in any other, continental European country that had PR would be completely normal, which is to compromise with the Conservatives on some of their policies. I mean, it's actually sad that how much the fact that both parties in the coalition have to compromise, that's been distorted, and it's been made to look as though coalition politics isn't democratic, even though clearly the two parties together did get a majority of the vote at the last general election. So I'm just worried that if we had a proportional system with a more multi-party flavour, that the British public would just not enjoy having so-called weak government. Because I think the British political culture has a way to go really on that stuff.
Thank you, Cameron. Your point has been backed up by some of our people some of the people tweeting tonight. We've had, for example, Sam Baxter at Sam J Bax is saying that he tends to stick by first past the post, but he might be open to a reform such as AMS. He's also said that look how the public reacted to parties having to compromise in coalition talks. Imagine that after every single election. It's quite true, isn't it? The public have been, and of course the Liberal Democrats have felt the pain of this in particular. We in Britain are not used to coalitions, are we? And surely if we were to change the electoral system, we would be creating more coalitions, something that people tend not to like.
Yeah, can I say something about that?
Please.
I mean, the recent example where the Labour Party, when they were in power for 13 years, offered devolution and offered a proportional system in Scotland and Wales, and that has resulted in a majority SNP government in Scotland. So actually, it's about how people vote. That's the key thing. If people vote for majority government, they'll get it. As for the idea that there'll be more coalitions, that might be the case, but it equally might be the case that we'll have confidence in supply arrangements. So parties don't go into formal coalition, but work with each other on a certain subset of issues. I think that's the way maybe perhaps we'll make it acceptable in Britain, and I do agree that it has been seen as unacceptable because of the way it's happened. A lot of people, a lot of the younger generation, particularly when it comes to Liberal Democrats, have been let down because they've seen a party standing on tuition fees, being against tuition fees and then voting for them. And they've seen that sort of betrayal, and that has tarnished their understanding of coalitions. I think people generally like the idea that politicians work together, but this coalition isn't a good example of that.
Well, I'd just like to say...
Yeah, go on, Cameron.
It says that that tarnished their understanding of the coalition. But essentially, if you look at continental Europe, where sometimes there are coalitions of 3 or 4 large parties, that's what coalition politics is. You have to compromise with different parties. You have to get a majority most of the time.
You don't have to have a coalition. There's nothing saying that you have to have a coalition.
Well, I think there's a reason why a lot of continental European countries do not go down the route of continental flight. I mean, even Germany, if you look at Germany, they've got a grand coalition of their equivalent of Labour, the SDP, and their Tory equivalent, the CDU. There's a reason why they don't like to have continental ideas, because it just makes a better government when the executive, the cabinet, commands a majority in Parliament on most issues, and all issues, in fact.
Okay, I want to just come to the defence of the Liberal Democrats who aren't here tonight, and then we've had lots of comments on this, so I'm going to spend a few moments going over those and seeing how you'd all like to respond to them. Just in defence of the Liberal Democrats, Rob, because I know that perhaps you and them are now arguing in one part over a similar area of political territory, they would be able to say to you that everyone who voted Liberal for 80 years got virtually nothing from it. Those who voted Liberal Democrat in 2010 have had 75% of their manifesto put in, and they wouldn't have got fees abolished if they'd gone in with Labour either, because neither of the two biggest parties were going to do it. So doesn't that sort of exemplify the fact that even though this party gets 75% of its manifesto and would never have got free tuition under Labour or a Conservative-led coalition, that's the thing that we focus on?
Can I say again? It's that they stood very clearly in areas, particularly Manchester, Withington, Bristol West, places like this that were high student populations, and they nailed their colours to the mast. You might say they got 75% of their manifesto. People won't see that, because what people see is the headline of what people want is people who are honest about what they're going to be able to do. Don't make promises you can't keep. That's the lesson here. It's not whether they got 75% of their manifesto put in. Fair enough. I'm going to deny that.
Okay, right, I'm going to come to John and Liam and Sam in a moment, and I'm going to ask you three to respond to some of the comments that people have made on this topic. And I say I'm going to go through a few of them, because I think they're really interesting. We've had lots and lots and lots on it. We've had Joe Pattinson, who, Joe_Pattinson, is currently residing in Germany. Says, wouldn't AMS need a drastic overhaul of the structure of local government if you were to bring it in there? And he's just looking at how it functions in Germany. We've had Jack at Mr. Jack MB saying first past the post isn't viable. Now we have 4 or arguably 5-party system. Cameron S at Cameron_surname is asking about whether about particular kinds of systems, and there might be some people on Twitter who want to talk about that with him. David Jeffrey is pointing out here at David Jeffrey _ calling first past the post undemocratic is simply incorrect. You might not think it's fair, but it is democratic. And he then goes on to point out that it's a chicken and egg problem. People don't care because first past the post makes a lot of votes irrelevant. So what's the point? Matt Green at MattJackGreen98. AMS is a complex system. Isn't voter turnout low enough already? Would increasing the complexity reduce turnout even further? Councillor Charles Fifield, that's Charles Fifield, is putting forward some specific systems to use, taking them from elsewhere, and one there from, and I've retweeted these on at Spectrum Debate, so you can find the links. That's worth having a look at as well. James here at Galasite is telling us a very underrated result of first past the post is the repression of political extremism, and it places election results most often in the hands of the voters and not politicians dealing post-election for coalitions. Right. Lots of comments. Who'd like to start on that of the other three, please?
Could I address a couple of those, please?
Please.
Firstly, suggesting that AMS is too complicated would lower voter turnout, I think, is completely wrong, to be honest. Firstly, it's 2 votes instead of 1 vote. I think could handle that increase of complexity, to be honest. And suggesting it would lower voter turnout is slightly silly. I think one of the most things that lower voter turnout at the moment is people believing their vote won't work or their vote won't count because they live in a particular area. With AMS or another proportional system, you could make your vote count, as well as having the strong local government or local representative that you need. As well as that, this point about political extremism, I think, is quite a dangerous point to make. Are we saying that the people we want are the two or three main parties, and everyone else who can't get a seat is therefore the extremes? Because that has been the main result so far, apart from the regional assemblies. I think that's quite a silly point to make, almost. No offence to the person who made it, who I'm sure has sensible reasons to make it, but it doesn't work if you think about it, I'm afraid to say.
John, specifically on the issue about complexity, when the Scottish Parliament introduced single transferable votes for local elections in Scotland, they went from having a matter of a few hundred spoilt ballots a year under first past the post to having 100,000 spoilt ballots. That's 100,000 people whose votes weren't counted at all because of the complexity.
Fair enough. Was that continuous over the entire period, or?
That was in that first election. I haven't had time to check the others, but I just thought it was something that stuck out in my mind. 100,000 voters in Scotland.
I suppose original change would have its hiccups. I mean, at the most recent European election, there was a party running very similar to UKIP, and that managed to get a lot of votes. But I think over time, people would be able to adapt quite quickly.
Okay. Liam, we'll come back to you in a moment to close the topic, so you can round us all off. But I'm going to go to Sam, and then I'll come back to you. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
So Sam, taking everything you've heard so far, what do you think?
Yes, well, I support an STV system, and I agree with John in that I don't think, perhaps after the initial one, there would be some complications, but after that there wouldn't be any complications. And it just shows that if systems like that are generating coalitions, then that just means that people want different things and that it's much fairer and much less biased system.
Lovely, thank you very much indeed. For what it's worth, before I go to Liam, my own view is I quite like first past the post. If we were to change, the one I would prefer is single transferable vote, despite the issues I was talking about before. But I would like small seats of maybe 3 MPs at most to try and keep some sort of semblance of constituency link. But that's just my view. Liam, would you like to close this topic for us, please?
Yeah, so unfortunately I missed a chunk in the middle, so I kind of missed some bits here and there. But from what I mostly gathered was the first past the post has the benefit of being a very simple system to understand. You vote, that's what happens. But someone said that first past the post is democratic, and therefore you can't really say, you may say it's unfair, but it's still democratic. But I can test on it's democratic in that one man one vote, or one person one vote. But you could also argue that it's more democratic in these systems where you have the ability to add extra votes. So whether it's just a single extra vote, or you can rate all the parties 1 to 10 or whatever it is. So that could be more democratic in that you have the more ability to express your vote and express your voice across multiple stages of voting. And the idea of it being too complicated, I think it's firstly a bit insulting to assume the general populace can't work it out. Maybe Scotland had the problem at the beginning, but over time, I'm sure that we'll get the hang of it. These things may take 1 or 2 to get perfectly right, but we'll get it eventually. And for example, we use, I don't know about many universities, but my university uses AV, and it literally doesn't take very long for people to work out how it works. It's a very simple system. Once you get that, you can now vote for more than one party, basically just order them to how you want to go. So I think still generally agree that the first past the post doesn't work well enough, but I can see the arguments made for STV and AMS, and single transferable votes basically being also valid, but I still prefer AV as a whole, where you rate from 1 to n of how many parties and the order you like them to be in. So yeah.
Lovely, thank you very much indeed, Liam. Thank everyone who's tweeted us on. There were many comments, in fact more than I think we've had on anything so far, so thank you very much. We're now going to select our next topic using the high quality method of bits of paper that I've cut up with people's names on. The next topic is going to be the one selected by Councillor Rob Telford. Rob, fire away.
Well, my topic is gender equality, and it isn't actually what I was planning to talk about, but it was as a result of some of the conversations that went on Twitter when some people saw that there were 5 men taking part in this debate. And I suppose the question I'm asking is, first of all, do we feel comfortable with there being only 5 5 people here and we're all men, or at least I think we're all men. I don't know. But what what is the way that we deal with this in society? Because from my perspective, I think 50% women and 50% men in Parliament will make a profound difference. I suppose what I'm asking is, do you believe in a quota system? Do you believe in all women shortlists? What's the way that we enable more women into politics? Because I've found myself in my party that we've been quite good at that, and I don't think that's blowing my own trumpet. I think that's quite objective. How do we get that sort of culture that allows women into the system more? Because there's all number of reasons why they don't get into politics or get into taking part in things as much, perhaps. How do we ensure that happens? I know this is going to be somewhat patronising in a sense because we're all men, but at the same time, I think it's an important thing to sort of look at. So yeah, I'll leave that with you.
Okay, well, just so people know, as Rob has said, there is some background to this, and I've just tweeted from @Spectrum Debates the conversation which prompted this issue the other day. It might be worth people having a look at that and letting us know what you think. As Rob has pointed out, we are indeed on this panel. I think ostensibly none of us are women. We have had all-male panels before, and we've had others that have been mixed, but it's true. We haven't had many or enough women on this panel. On this show before. I don't know if anyone would like to start off. Rob asked specifically about issues to do with employing quotas, for example, as one method of getting around this in terms of people becoming active in politics. Who'd like to start? Can
I start on this one?
Please do.
Okay, yeah. So it's a bunch of white guys on a panel, so like therefore like acknowledging Rob's like is like patronising to talk. So I don't want to talk.
Asian, I think you're fine.
Okay, sorry, half Asian, sorry. But for 4 white guys talking about what I'm trying to from what I've learned from listening to people talk about this, women specifically talk about this, is that the idea of representations are quite powerful at fixing change and inspiring change in a kind of vaguely organic way. When you have women seen as being the top of the top, able to achieve ministerial benches or being prime minister and stuff, it kind of inspires more women to get into the field. The same way that we do that in science, is we try encourage more women to attend, and therefore that kind of trickles down to more and more. I like quotas to an extent. I think they're quite a good idea of basically ensuring that the discrimination and bias that exists in making it an all boys club it's forced to be challenged at a fundamental level. Some people may say that it's unfair that a woman gets picked because she's female over a man, but that ignores the whole bias that exists for her getting to there in the first place. There's a huge amount of chunk of bias that stops them getting there to the top anyway. But I don't like all women shortlists, because I find that then turns the competition of having women compete against men to having women compete against women themselves, which is then more problematic in the fact that you're saying we want 3 women's seats, and then we'll put all the women against each other to go for those seats. And I think that's not a good way of dealing with the problem, because you basically just allow all the men to exist in one place and have the women fight with each other rather than them fight effectively on equal terms. So yeah.
Thank you very much. Anybody else?
I think I'm going to have to disagree, to be honest, about quotas. I have always believed in merit defining where people got, and the problem I have with quotas is it may determine how something looks at the top. You may say on the board of directors in a company it is now 50-50, that's great. Middle management further down it might be 90-10. So quotas can act as sort of a fig leaf to people's attitudes, and I think overall it doesn't work very well.
Thank you very much indeed. Some of the comments that we've had so far, Dylan is lamenting the fact that he would like to have really taken part in this debate tonight. So Dylan, tweet us and tell us what you think, and we'll get that on air. Cameron is saying, should it matter? It's the view that people have in politics we're interested in, not the bit between their legs. And there's an issue that someone else has brought up, which I will put to you all in a minute. Sam, I don't know if you want to say anything on this topic.
Yes, I do support quotas, but I also agree with John when he's saying that you have to be careful in that it doesn't cause anything to happen the opposite way, or anybody to be picked. Although I understand that there are, that there is a bias against women generally at the moment, but sometimes I worry that it sometimes forces people to pick women when that might not necessarily be the correct choice, and in the same way it may force people to choose men over women, which is not good. I think it should be a natural process that's sort of done organically.
Okay, in my own case here, in certainly when we were selecting my party's parliamentary candidate here, my understanding is we had one female applicant and about 5 male applicants, and our membership chose the female applicant, who is now our parliamentary candidate. So obviously there are barriers, and I'm certainly not going to try anything there, but I know that sometimes it can be easy to say that all politicians and all people involved in politics are automatically skewed against women or towards men. Thankfully, that isn't always the case, but certainly does happen in other places. Cameron, do you have anything to add on this one?
Well, I mean, personally, I would not want to see any quotas, legally mandated. I mean, as I said, I wouldn't like to see a quota for people who are of Asian ethnicity, which is a kind of, you might start by just trying to get gender equality, and then eventually you'll wind up, making Parliament or boards of businesses or whatever, trying to make them more representative, and you might just end up excluding the most enthusiastic or capable candidates because they happen to come from one socially identifiable sector. It's ridiculous. I mean, if parliamentary parties want to select that, using all women shortlists or all male shortlists maybe in the future, that's their choice really. But I mean, it's caused a lot of problems in places like there's a place in I think it's in Kinnon Valley where Labour Party have tried to impose an all women shortlist, and it hasn't gone down well with the members there, to be honest. So that's pretty much my take. It's not the most detailed feminist rant you'll ever get.
Thank you. Some of the points that people have made again on Twitter. Dylan is telling us here that gender inequality is still dangerously and devastatingly rife in modern society. Just take a look at Dapper Laughs this past week and all the men defending him. I've not actually seen one woman defending his actions or
well, I have, but
fair enough. James, again, at Gaylorsight here, is telling us men having privilege means that men who are in support of feminism must be more vocal, as they are more likely to be listened to. Though, of course, this must not distract from women driving forward the movement as their own. Cameron S, Cameron_surname. I find women-only shortlists both undemocratic, patronising, and actually quite discriminatory. He is not alone there. Tom Hewitt agrees with him at Tom W. Hewitt. Quotas are patronising to women, makes them feel they don't get their job based on ability. Jenny, at Jenny Hugh Jenny, is saying she has been asked to take part in this, but she hasn't had the time so far. Adam Hawkes is pointing out that this is not just a political problem. Over 50% of law graduates are female, and yet a minority of senior judges are female. What has gone wrong? And Councillor Charles Fifield, at Charles Fifield, promoting equality should be about ensuring equality of opportunity. It's up to us as individuals as to how we respond. Any comments from anyone?
Yes, I was going to just make a tie-in with engineering, that there are very few women in engineering, and at the moment there are grants available for women in engineering to support them while they're studying, and I've spoken to a few women who were on the course I did at university, and they felt that was very discriminatory against them getting financial incentives for becoming a woman in engineering. So I think that it can be transferred to this side of the debate as well, that you've got to be careful when you do set quotas and set targets, as it were.
Thank you. Yeah. Anyone else?
I would like to say that I accept that there are inequalities, very visible in places like politics and business in terms of female representation, but that doesn't necessarily represent what's going on in reality. It doesn't represent the overall trend towards women. I mean, if you look at the average age of most parliamentarians and most people who are very senior in business, tends to reflect more the inequalities and the differences in values of the previous generation. I think when people are sort of the younger generation, sort of 35 and below, in maybe 15 or 20 years, start to fill positions that are currently being filled by sort of the older generations, you might say. I think the inequalities will start really to naturally reduce, and I think that representation will be even there more naturally. I don't think it's anything, legal or political that causes inequalities as much as it is sort of cultural, particularly in previous generations, sort of the soft bigotry of low expectations, where people will, have a daughter or whatever, and they will not advise her to. They would not have advised her, maybe in previous generations, to pursue the kind of stereotypically masculine career path. Whereas now I think that problem has mostly, admittedly thanks to feminism, has dissipated, and so I just think in the future these quotas that could be they could be implemented now, but they may be redundant in the future, because I think the overall trend is towards is towards greater gender and racial as well.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Cameron. I'm going to read a few more comments, then ask Rob to close this part of the debate. Dylan is telling us here that it's easy to say that society will evolve on its own, but history tells us otherwise. Any semblance of gender equality, especially, has only come about by movements acting and reacting to the ills of society, and as a result, whereas he used to oppose quotas, he now thinks they're necessary. Tom Hewitt is pointing out that soft incentives might make more sense. For example, tax breaks for improving gender balance. We've got Pyroanus here is telling us a candidate should be elected on merit, regardless of gender, and they're against the ideas of quotas full stop. Jim K, @_Jim K_, people should win positions based on merit, not through the need to fill quotas. And finally here, James at Galasite, why get offended by quotas when you can get offended by the blasted problem in the first place? Rob, to close the topic.
I thank you all for your contributions, and I think we're all working towards an assumption that we want to see more women in politics. I think that's something I think most people in this country would agree with. I don't think we've got all the answers here from what we've said today. I do think that there is room for quotas, but how would it work? How would we make it, in some sense, an affirmative action to allow quotas, but at the same time not discriminate in another way? And that's the difficulty of this discussion, and that's why I brought it up, because it's a complex issue and something that I think we can always do with discussing every now and again. From my perspective, if someone wanted to stand in my seat next time, in my council seat, who is a woman, and they put themselves up through the internal processes of my political party, I personally would step aside for that person, particularly if I thought they were great, but equally if I thought they were someone who would bring a different perspective to me, because at the moment there's 2 local councillors in my ward and they're both men. So if I have a local councillor who's a man and a local councillor who's a woman, that gives a greater access to democracy for the people of my ward. So from my perspective, it's better to have a woman and a man. So I think it's partly up to us. We've got to make the right decisions for ourselves, but it's partly we've got to set something in place to make it more accessible for women. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much all for your comments. Before we move on to the next topic, we've just got a quick flash question here that has been presented to us by Joe Harrington, who is @Harrington_Joe, who's saying that the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan, declared cyber war on Anonymous, and during this broadcast, Anonymous have taken down the KKK's website. What do we think of this?
Brilliant. You can't say what's better than that, I guess.
Thank you.
Our an evil group.
The KKK will try anything to stay even vaguely in the news. It shows what they get for lifting their head above the parapet. Other people privately dealing with them.
Liam.
And Anonymous is kind of fallen once again into the bait of like a group trying to declare, like when Westboro Baptist Church tried to make itself relevant by like declaring war on Anonymous, and like Anonymous happily provided the media attention to return to them. And like it bothers me because while I do like what Anonymous does, it is massively like inefficient at like dealing with racial problems, and like it just doesn't have the nuance available. But KKK getting their website taken down is always fun, so I can't complain too much.
Rob.
Actually,
Sorry, go on. Who was that? Cameron?
yeah, sorry. Actually, this would be a good question for the representative of the Pirate Party. Here, well, I know he's not representative, but would a domain name, would a website come under private property? And if so, technically, is this not damage of private property?
Okay, we'll give Sam a chance to come. He's going to be the last to speak on this quick flash question. Rob, anything to add?
All it makes me think of is that West Wing episode where Josh Lyman compares who is it, Al Qaeda to the KKK. That's analogous in some way, and I didn't even know I'm not aware of the KKK anymore. That's deeply worrying to me that the KKK is a real and live thing. I honestly can't tell you what I think about that, just off the top of my head.
Sam.
Sorry, I missed Cameron's question because it was all broken up. Could you just?
Yeah, he was.
I apologise for that.
Cameron, do you want to try again?
Yeah. Does this not? Should this constitute some sort of crime? I mean, is their domain name, if they're at kkk.com or whatever, is that not their property? I mean, as much as I hate them, as I loathe, racism, whatever, it's just isn't it their right to have a web page without it getting attacked?
Interesting point. Did he get it that time?
Sorry, I still didn't get it.
Well, basically saying, is their website not their private domain and their private property? In a country, particularly as America, where they have a right to freedom of speech, what right does anyone else have to attack their private site and take it down like that, no matter how repugnant they are?
Yes, well, I don't completely agree with the way Anonymous works by, having an attack with an attack. I think that you can get at things at different ways. So I would agree that yes, it's a personal space for them, but at the same time, the KKK put themselves out there, and although I've not really heard anything from them and don't follow anything and haven't really followed the story, but I would say that it's probably just more of a marketing and sort of trying to get the word out there rather than anything serious or anything to be worried about, I think.
Okay, thank you. We had that question asked. I thought I'd put it to you all quickly, and thank you very much for your views. A couple of people have tweeted about this. Gavin at Blue Liberal has tweeted that's only the second funniest KKK-related story this week. He's tweeted a link, and I've retweeted it, so you can have a look at that. And Cameron S is saying, do people not find Anonymous a bit scary? Total lack of accountability as a group, and they seem to have quite some power. There's one for another day. Let's see who's going to be introducing our next topic, and it will be... Cameron.
Right. This was the European Union, I believe. I wasn't quite sure, given that I was just the last minute. But I think the European Union has been in the news this week because I'm not quite sure it's been in the news this week.
Okay.
Well, could somebody help me out here?
Let me just explain here. Bless him, Cameron has stood in literally at the last second, and we've given him the topic that was going to be left over, which is about the European Union. But I won't put that pressure on you, Cameron. Let me just come to it, and we'll just have a quick general discussion about it, because obviously this is one of those issues that currently is dominating politics again. It seems to come around every 10 years or so, and may well shape quite a lot of the debate over the next 3 or 4 years. We know that there's a big difference between the pro-Europeans, the Eurosceptics, and the anti-EU brigades. Where do we stand on this, each of us? What might our party view be on it? This might be a helpful point at which those of you in particular who support a party might be able to explain your party's stance on the European Union. And I'll start on this one with... I'll go to you, Cameron, first of all. All right, so general about the European Union.
What the Conservative Party stance or my stance?
Both.
Well, obviously, the Conservative Party stance is we've got to try and renegotiate as many powers back as we can, possibly including the power to control borders, which would obviously negate the freedom of movement clause inherent in pretty much all the treaties. And obviously, at the end of the negotiation process, there would be an inert referendum where the British people could decide if they wanted to stay in on these new terms or leave the EU altogether. My personal opinion is quite similar. It's that we should obviously try and renegotiate some powers. However, I think David Cameron is being very, very helpful if you think that any of the 4 fundamental freedoms of the EU, such as freedom of movement, is negotiable. In fact, as Chancellor Merkel said this week, I think a lot of England would rather we left than to have the 4 fundamental freedoms at the core of it, any of them violated anymore. I do support an innate referendum, of course, at the end, on the grounds that it's the most democratic thing. The EU is a fundamental addition to our constitution. It's almost an integral constitutional matter now. To have an innate referendum obviously would be morally the right thing to do. I would support one because I believe that I personally am generally quite pro-Europe, and I'm not particularly anti-immigration, and I'm not particularly I'm okay with the freedom of movement of people. I know that puts me in the majority in my own party, but that's just the way it is. So I think the referendum campaign would be a really good chance to educate the majority of people on the issue, and I would personally try and to stay within the EU if I were to go on a campaign. I think at this stage I would vote to stay in. But as with the Scottish referendum, the campaign is a good chance to get people on the track and persuade them one way or the other. I think it could work both ways.
Indeed, Cameron. We've not heard from Liam for a while now. Liam, as the person who isn't coming from any partisan point of view, how do you view the landscape?
I'll open by explaining that I'm actually biased in the whole issue because come January I'll be living in Paris for a few years to do my PhD. So the free movement of individuals is quite useful for me because I'm moving to Europe and it's very, very simple because of it. So I'm obviously biased and quite liking the fact that I can emigrate without much difficulty. At the same time, I generally like the EU. I like the concept of a kind of unified European government to an extent. I'm quite fond of the idea. I'm aware of the kind of problems that have come about because of it, but the ability to have quite open trade is economically beneficial, and immigration has seemed, as far as I can tell, being economically beneficial as well. So in general, I quite like being I can leave, that people can come in, and that it's generally good for the country as far as we can tell. Yeah.
Okay, John.
Yeah, I think I'm going to have to disagree with everything everyone has said so far.
Fire away.
Of course, I'm a member of UKIP. I'm very in favour of a referendum on the EU. There are so many issues the EU now touches. Have a debate on the EU and basically have a debate on the entirety of British government policy, ranging from immigrations to immigration to economics to social issues. I'm not going to deny there has been some positive benefits from the EU. But overall, I have to say that the EU has been a massive negative force in Europe and not just the UK. I suppose, for me personally, the reason I'm not a fan of the EU has been the democratic deficit. For me, democracy is you elect someone to represent the views of your local community to government. And with the EU, I can't have that, so I've been fundamentally against it. Lots of people have said to me, oh, we could reform it and there's an EU Parliament, things like this, but the EU Parliament can't propose or strike down legislation, and the EU will never be reformed. Cameron, bless him, has perhaps got the highest motivation ever to reform the EU and will not admit what he's going to reform because he knows he's not going to get much. So overall, the EU has become this large mass of undemocratic government that will never change and is slowly, I hate to say destroying Britain, but is slowly dragging Britain backwards.
Thank you very much indeed, John. Now you have some support online here. Cameron is telling us that it seems only sane to be anti-open door immigration, accepting only those who have the skills that we need. However, that is in the minority of the views that we're getting so far online, which seem very strongly in favour of freedom of movement for people and business. Rob, your view, please.
Well, I don't know what John thought he was doing, a couple of months ago, when we voted in the European elections. He was voting for representatives to go to the European Union. And I know in my region, the South West, we fought very hard and got an MEP elected for the first time in the South West. So that was a pretty big deal for us. So I do think there is a level of representation there. I mean, have you been to Europe? It's great. I mean, it wasn't so great for a time when there was loads of wars going on. Oh, and then we all got together and decided maybe we should talk to each other rather than having those wars.
And those
that's the
people in
basis
the
of
Balkans,
the EU.
I think they just had a little argument. I mean, there was no genocide in Europe.
Sorry?
Listen.
I think the point John was making was that actually we've had problems in Europe since the advent of the EU. For example, the genocide that went on in the Balkans.
Okay, right. Well, that isn't bad. Right.
EU, that one.
I kind of think if we weren't in the EU, that would be even worse. And most issues would be even worse if we weren't in the EU. Now, I understand completely the idea of having a referendum. My party is in favour of having a referendum. And I'm personally very in favour of having a referendum, because we could then shut up about it and get on with actually, dealing with issues. It seems to be the only thing that we ever talk about in the political debate. And it's incredibly frustrating, because it's mostly heat, it's not mostly light, it's mostly people saying it's not democratic. No, it isn't, but we need to reform it. We don't need to put it out and say, oh, we're great, we're our little island. That's a terrible idea. So simply, it's, yes, we need a referendum, we need to give people a say. I haven't a say, I don't think anyone else on this panel has had a say in whether we should be in the EU. We need reform of the EU, and we need to stay in, because if we don't stay in, we're throwing away an awful lot of good work. There's so many different laws that are made in the EU that affect everyone and improve our lives. And that isn't just mobile phone charges and things like that. It's things like intelligence across nations. It's like sharing intelligence. It's giving people the sense that we're part of a global community, much more so than you would get if you went to, say, the United States and asked them whether they wanted an agreement between Mexico and Canada. We have a very shared history with these nations in Europe, and we need to keep that strong and keep that good solid relationship going. So this idea that we withdraw and that the British people would vote to leave the EU, I think is absolute rubbish. I don't think we choose that. I think the majority of people know that.
I think we've frozen there, haven't we? Right. Yes, we'll come back to you in a second, Rob. In case you can hear us, you have frozen. Sam, I'm going to come to you. I'm going to preface it by a comment that we've had from a fellow member of your party, who's saying that on a net basis, freedom of movement is a good thing. Some people are hurt by it. We need to find ways to support them instead. Can you outline to us what your general view is and what the view of the Pirate Party would be?
Yes, well, first of all, the view of the party is the same as everybody, I think, is that we need a referendum on the EU, and we need to have it now, right now, because the longer we wait, the more biased people are going to be against getting out of the EU, because we're just going to be fed up with it. The EU needs reform, but I think we have to be very careful when we're talking about getting out of the EU, because there are the figures have shown that there are over 2 million British people who have emigrated out of this country. What happens to them when the EU disappears or we get out of the EU? And also, the thing that annoys me slightly is, which UKIP's stance, this is me personally, is that they want to get out of the EU but carry on reforming it, carry on working with the EU, which I don't see how that can happen. And just on the topic of bringing money in, and because I know that's something that's been in the news lately, is that in a decade the EU, this is between 2001 and 2011, has contributed more than the EU citizens have contributed more than £20 billion into our economy. So I don't really see how those arguments for keeping out of the EU to save ourselves is a good thing. I think it would be detrimental to the country if we were out of the EU, and that's my personal view.
Thank you very much. A few more comments, then I'll come back to John. But first of all, can I say, is there anybody who doesn't want a referendum? I mean, anybody. And it's remarkable that we've not. You don't want one, Liam. Okay, we'll come to you in a second, and you can tell us that, and then I'll go to John, because he's had a lot of haranguing sent his way at the point, and his party certainly. But I'll come to you in a moment, Liam, just on that point, why you think a referendum isn't a good thing. A variety of views here. We've had Pyro Annis here, who's saying we don't have to be in the EU to have free movement of people. We had it long before the EU even existed. Dylan Morris is saying Euro federalism now. I'm such a terrible Tory. Cameron Surname is saying nobody on the panel has had a say on being a member of the EU because nobody has. The vote was for the EEC. Councillor Charles Fifield has tweeted a very helpful guide to how the EU works. I think the hashtag simples that he uses slightly ironically, and I've RT'd that. James at Gamersite is telling us here that it's a tiresome point to make that the EU has prevented war. It was all to do with empires and the liberalisation of Europe and experiences of war, and to talk about that is patronising. So, Liam, before I come to John, why do you think a referendum is a bad idea?
Mostly because I literally don't trust referendums to be treated fairly, like in the media anymore. The AV referendum was monstrously just utter lies were being treated as truth, and like it was just annoying to watch people like lie and no one question it. The Scottish referendum, while I did support staying together, it was just so filled with lies that no one questioned and no one was like answering in the media. So like I don't trust us to have a decent referendum when it comes to the EU, which I know is like goes against like democratic principles like the right to choose, but I just don't trust our media and like the way people deliver themselves, like the politicians explaining what their views, to be in any way like honest with us. And like it's a really sad thing to say. I just don't trust a referendum to be treated in any way fairly. So.
Okay, thank you very much, John. You've been maligned here, and now's your chance.
Right. Got lots of points. Firstly, with this referendum issue. I know there has been lots of debate around this. Certainly people in the party were talking about having more fixed controls on spending within the referendum to make sure both sides had a say of their point and were not able to get their message out above the others, which I think was perhaps a good idea, such a big constitutional issue. With the idea that the EU is in any way democratic, I still can't be convinced on, to be honest. The idea, for example, or that it can be reformed from being undemocratic. I mean, recently we saw Donald Tusk was, I believe, president of Poland. He became the European Council president. When he moved to become European Council president, his pay went up by 300%. Would it be wise for him or any other ex-politician to change the system where they suddenly increase their power and their pay? So, this idea that we could reform an undemocratic system that is the EU is slightly laughable to me, personally. And also, this idea that somehow being against the EU is being against free trade. I mean, I know Rob made the point about the US. The US is in a free trade agreement with Mexico and Canada currently. I think it's called NAFTA.
That's right, yeah.
So I don't take this point that coming out of the EU would be against the world. I think quite the opposite. The EU currently has large trade barriers around itself, so to support itself, but against everyone else. I think coming out of it would be a very good idea if we wanted to trade more fairly with the world.
Thank you very much indeed. Cameron, did you want to say something there?
Yeah, I wanted to say, I think...
Unfortunately, your broadband connection didn't seem to want to let you have that.
No.
Go on.
Okay. I think I do support the EU, but I think the point about it having prevented war is a bit dishonest. I think that's more to do with the Marshall Plan, NATO, sort of the universal values that are meant to be common by all European nations. I think particularly the fact that we've had the USA, you know, to put there, and the Soviet Union perhaps before on the other side to sort of mediate disputes. I think that more than the EU itself has contributed to peace, although I'm for the EU for different reasons.
Thank you. A couple more comments, and then I'll see if anyone wants to give a few closing points here. Joe Patterson, who, if you remember, is currently living in Germany, although he's from the UK, is telling us that we shouldn't forget about the healthcare in regards to EU membership, being positive we can get free healthcare elsewhere. Plus, we aren't part of the Schengen Agreement, so we can modify the rules on freedom of movement. Yet, he says, the democratic flaws in the EU are resounding. We've had... I'll come whoever that was in a moment. We've had Alicia here at Upon a Cloud saying, is it really free? Many are fleeing countries with economics sinking down like the Titanic, and they hate it here. And Cameron S., free trade is actually harmed by the EU. Tariffs from Europe hurt farmers in the developing world. Any final comments from people?
Only that my...
Well, I'd just like to say that there have...
Cameron, then. Was that?
Okay, I'd just like to say first that there have been plenty of plans and recommendations and reforms and ways have been proposed to.
Okay, yes, yours is going a bit funny at the moment. Rob?
Governments that want them to be, intergovernmental and not federalist.
Okay, thank you very much. Rob, did you want to add something at that point?
Hello?
I can hear you.
Oh, I'm here. Yes. Hello. I guess my point wanted to make about the referendum is that if we have a referendum, I feel like you're right about the tabloids that they skew it in one direction, but at the same time, in this case, I actually think even in this case they would see the economic benefit. We're all part of a global system of capitalism. That's the way it is at the moment, and I can see that the newspapers would come round to the idea that we should stay in the EU because it benefits us economically. So actually, I do agree that is a concern, that referendums aren't necessarily as democratic as other forms of decision making, but that they will. In this case, I think it would deliver a strong vote to stay in.
Thank you. Anyone else want to comment on the issue of the EU before we move to our final topics?
I think we could debate about this for the next year. So I'll just say that out of the 41 years we have been members of the EU, 40 of those we have been net contributors. The only time we weren't was when we had our first referendum. So I don't take the point that we economically benefited from it.
Thank you very much. Right, I tweeted whilst we were talking about that if anyone thinks it might be a good idea for us to have another one-off debate, this time about the EU. David Jeffrey says, God no! Cameron S is saying 100% yes. Charles Fifield says yes, and Dylan Morris says so far a majority of our audience is saying yes, we should have a single topic debate on the European Union. So if you're interested in that at home, if you'd like to take part in something like that, get in touch using the details up here at DM at Spectrum Debates if you would like to take part in that debate, and we'll see what we can arrange. Let's go for our next topic then. This is the penultimate one, and this is John. This is yours.
Okay, thank you. My topic is on right of recall, and my question is: does the current recall bill show Parliament has contempt for the public? And I ask that because, as we saw recently, the Zach Goldsmith amendment was struck down, and the current bill has within it, for a recall vote to be passed, it would have to be approved by I think it's the Parliamentary Standards Committee, which is mostly made up of MPs. So I ask you, in my personal opinion, we are now not only has Parliament rejected that people should have power over them, they've also said they should have power over themselves. And I find that not only a rejection, but also a way of taking us backwards in a way of democratic accountability.
Thank you very much indeed. Who would like to join in on this issue?
I think I'll comment if you don't mind.
Fire away.
On the recall bill, I always feel that, for example, Zach Goldsmith's bill amendment recently that was overturned, it feels like an attack on democracy. and that the political system's being sabotaged and being taken away from the people and being given back to the political elite. And I think this a recall bill would be much better, because it would allow us to allow the people to have much more say in what goes on in Westminster.
Thank you. Just a quick point here, because some of the people who opposed either the issue of recall in general or the specific amendment said that if you had, all it would take is to have a certain hardcore number of people to sign a petition, and they could constantly be having re-elections to try and get rid of an MP they don't like, that people keep re-electing. Is that not a distinct possibility in this matter? And if anyone wants to comment on that?
I don't think it is a possibility, because of the high bar that you set for this. You know, putting the bar at 20% really does show how hard it would be to continually put effort into getting this number of signatures, blah de blah de blah. It would take a long, hard effort to get it one time. To get it 2 times in a parliament is very, very unlikely. And I think 20% is a very high bar. 20% of an entire electorate, that's a very, very high bar. So for me, the Goldsmith recommendations were a very conservative measure, actually, ironically, given that he's a conservative MP. I think we could have gone further with it. I actually think that they're quite solid, and they would give us a sense that we've got a little bit more power, and that's what a lot of people are asking for. So I think that's the position I'd take.
Thank you. Any other comments on this?
My argument would be that even if the bar is quite high as 20%, it still allows a possibility for people to be unseated on the basis of people disagreeing with their decisions in office, you know, their political, ideological, policy decisions, rather than the one reason I think that we should be allowed to get rid of elected representatives before their term ends, which is that they have actually committed something that is objectively illegal, such as expenses, fraud, or they've done something that actually, yeah, that's pretty much it. It would just be stuff that's illegal, really. But you shouldn't have to get rid of someone just because they've exercised their judgment in a way you don't like.
Okay. Go on, fire.
So, can I say that is democracy, though, isn't it? If someone does something you don't agree with, you have the right to disagree with it and then take political action. That's the entire point of it. If we lived in a vacuum.
Yeah, but go on, Cameron.
But there's a limit, because you have to meet them in the middle. You have to sort of accept that, yes, you've elected them. You can't just recall them back for any reason, any day. You've got to give them time to, you know, see their plans through or whatever, to a certain extent. Hence why we don't have general elections every week. We have them, every 4 or 5 years. 5 years it is now.
I disagree slightly with that it would be every week. Under the Goldsmith proposal, you'd have to get 14,000 signatures. And I must admit, for 14,000 signatures, it'd be a wonderful Parliament, perhaps, event. Something, I don't know, something moral, almost like gay marriage, perhaps, that would garner that kind of public feeling. But to say it would be every week, or this would be flippant, that people could get thrown out, even possibly, would be perhaps exaggerating it. It would be a very rare occurrence, but it would still be more than we have now, because we still have MPs like Mike Hancock, who are still in their office somehow.
Well, has Mike Hancock not been considered a criminal offence? That's my...
Well, let's not go down that route. That might be a bit complicated. Taking that point on, John, is it not a risky business to start? I mean, you've compared there people doing things that a certain, you know, substantial minority might not like, sort of one-off events, and you've taken the issue of equal marriage. Is it not the entire point that sometimes Parliament needs to do things that are either difficult and unpleasant, or that a substantial number of people don't like, such as equal marriage, because it's the right or necessary thing to do? And in order to give if you were to give a chunk of people the ability to then recall their MP, because, let's take this example and take it further, their MP has voted for equal marriage. And does that not sort of make a mockery of the fact that our MPs are elected not as delegates, but they're elected to exercise their own judgment, assuming we follow the Edmund Burke model of MPs here. And it's quite dangerous to do that unless they have been found, as Cameron says, guilty of something, some genuine wrongdoing, not just because they've done something that, let's say, a substantial religious population in their constituency doesn't like.
Let's take that example forward then. Say several MPs are vote for gay marriage, and there is a substantial religious group within their constituencies who then take this forward and manage to get enough signatures to force a referendum. Even then, most of the time, those MPs will be re-elected because it's only 20% of the electorate, and more of them would vote for them. Even if one of them, of several, was unseated, it would then be the will of the majority of their constituency, kind of the point of their constituency. So I think over 99% of the time, this would still represent the views of the constituency, but give greater power to the people.
Doesn't that rely, though, and sorry, now we'll let someone else come in a moment, but wouldn't that rely on a subsequent recall election being based or voted on by all the people in that constituency on that single issue? Let's say, for example, you'd had a situation where a Liberal Democrat MP in a constituency that has a sizable religious minority in voted for equal marriage, and that religious minority really, really hated what they had done. They could then whip up enough signatures to have a re-election to recall that MP. Well, of course, looking at the cycle as things are now, the Liberal Democrats are severely unpopular. Are we saying that that MP who exercised their judgment on something to, in this case, give people more freedom and rights, is now going to be judged not on that issue? They're going to be judged on the general unpopularity of their party. Surely that's not fair and democratic.
You're assuming the person who replaced them would have a different view on that one particular issue, and wouldn't be, say, from the Labour Party, who would have the same view but would take advantage of it. Also, you are assuming that they wouldn't then use their position on that issue to garner support from people that wouldn't usually vote for them on their record.
Thank you. Anyone else want to talk about this or that particular aspect of it?
But I was just going to comment on that. That I think saying that one person supports one thing and one person supports another, and then they must be opposed, I think that's too simple, and it simplifies the whole process too much. So I think most of the time you would find that there's nothing is wrong, would be wrong with it, and nothing would go wrong, and there wouldn't be elections every 2 minutes.
Thank you. A few of the comments that have come in, and then I'll ask for closing comments from everyone and ask John to close this topic. Tom Hewitt is pointing out we do have the right of recall. It happens every 5 years at the general election, although he thinks that the parliamentary term should be reduced to 4 years. Pyro Annis is surprised that over 150 MPs actually supported Zach Goldsmith's version of recall. Dylan H. Morris, Tory Swing, is agreeing with the fact that actually the recall about whether or not they're doing a good job is called a general election, whereas Cameron S. says there should be some form of recall for people misrepresenting their constituents. Party whips don't help this. Final comments from anyone before I ask John to close?
I think one way you could, instead of a recall bill, I would support lowering or shortening the period of Parliament so that is sort of the same thing, it's the same effect. Okay,
thank you. Rob, do you have anything on this?
I've actually been struggling to hear. It's been breaking up a little bit, but my main view on this is the second recall that you would have after the 20% is the key thing. I do think I think I heard someone mentioning 5-year terms are too long. I mean, I agree with that. I think the Charter's said it right. I think that the sooner we have elections, the better in some sense. I mean, I don't think we should always be on an election footing, but it does help to be able to elect people in shorter terms. And I know that short-termism isn't a good thing, but I think that is manageable in terms of keeping these kind of recall petitions down, actually. And although I support them, I actually do think it is better if people wait till the general election. But I think in general, people just want more say, and that's something that we should try and give to them, because at the end of the day, they're part of this, and to involve more people in it is always a good idea.
Thank you very much. Liam, your final comments before John closes this part of the debate.
I didn't keep up with the news, so I don't really know much about this bill. But as a kind of general concept, like I generally agree with like what I think Rob and Sam said, like the idea of like generally giving more democracy, like an ability to have control over their MPs is going to generally be better off. And like while I kind of buy the harms that would be shown by yourself, I don't think that changes much because like lots of MPs already do kind of vote pander, like they don't make their own decisions, they go with what their constituents want because they know it's popular. So like it's already a harm that really exists. So I don't think it's going to be changed in any way by giving voters more ability to recall their MPs.
Thank you. Some comments for you to ponder on now, John, as you close. Joe Pattinson is saying MPs should really have to be very, very naughty for a recall to occur. Tom Hewitt saying that turnout is also very low in by-elections. Only those that actually care about the issue would turn out, which might skew the result. And Sam Baxter, unless an MP breaks the law, they shouldn't face recall. If you're unhappy otherwise, vote against them at the general election. John, to close the topic.
I'm not going to suggest that the Goldsmith recall bill is perfect. What I'm going to suggest is that people definitely want more democracy in our system, more accountability, and I think it's the best idea people have so far. While I do support shortening the terms, to say we should just wait for a general election is perhaps not going far enough, because at a general election you could have voted against everything your constituencies want, but still under the current system you could then use the fear of the other party or the other government getting into power to make sure you secure re-election. So I think to say that only people who commit crime should face recall is wrong. Parliament is, despite being there to govern, it's also there to represent its people well. If a parliamentarian is not representing his people well or completely betraying his people who've elected him to represent, then he should face recall.
Thank you very much. We move now to our final topic, which is Sam's.
Yes, so my topic is broadband access for all. So this is the ideas of allowing free or very nearly free access to broadband to all homes in the UK. So it would effectively make broadband or internet provision a utility like water, electricity, gas. One of my big things that I do in my professional life is install fibre networks into rural communities, and we've seen that this can really uplift communities and really bring communities together as well, and it has a lot of social and economic benefits.
Thank you very much indeed. Right, anyone got any views on this particular topic? Because it occurs to me that we've had a lot of work done recently about trying to roll out high-speed broadband across the UK, and I wonder, Sam, for those of us who might not know a great deal about it, you were talking about helping install in rural communities, which are often the last to get these services, and as we know, some of them don't have gas, and many people in rural communities don't even have main sewage. They have to use, I can't remember the name of it now, but...
septic tanks, yeah.
There we
are. 3 of the villages that we've done only have septic tanks and oil-powered heating, so they're without gas and main sewerage. So it's a completely different world to what most of us live in.
So how could we get to the situation where we are treating broadband access as being equally important to utilities when quite a few people, as you've just described, don't have access to some of those utilities?
Well, it's things like when building new homes, installing the proper conduiting and the proper base cabling for everything to happen, and it's also influencing the content provider, service providers to actually invest in the network, which is what's happening at the moment with the broadband rollout. But unfortunately, that has its flaws, as BT are only doing the areas where they know that they can get the best profit out of it, which isn't the point behind the government and the taxpayer investing in the infrastructure.
Thank you very much. John?
Yeah, a couple of points on this. I was recently in Estonia, where they'd raised the right to broadband access to a human right, so that it was mandatory that when there was the building of new homes in new areas, that the rollout of broadband was certain for these new places, as well as reaching out to these rural communities. And I must admit, I agree with Sam that this is vital. Despite my party surprisingly doing best where fibre optic broadband is now available, I do think this is needed. And I also agree that this government plan with BT to roll out has been perhaps too slow. And I know several people within my party in very senior ranks have been encouraging different providers to step in where BT have failed to fully complete their promises of earlier. And I think this is quite good because we can't have a monopoly. And it does worry me slightly that the government working with mainly BT has created this where no one is particularly motivated to finish the work or complete it well. I know in Wales we have quite a few problems with broadband connections, and this is mainly down to BT being the only provider of local broadband wires and service.
Thank you very much. A few of the comments from people who are watching at home here. Adam Hawkes is telling us, and naturally what I've done is I've gone and moved my screen. Adam Hawkes is saying that broadband is a vital necessity. Most businesses these days rely on the internet for convenience. And he goes on to tell us that where a utility isn't available, a suitable alternative is. There is no suitable alternative for broadband. He's agreed with by Joe Harrington, absolutely unequivocally yes. Cameron S, however, points out, free Wi-Fi for all, everywhere, anytime, YOLO, forget about the cost, let's party like it's 1997. How do we pay for such a big infrastructure change? Rob?
Well, I'd like to back up for a sec. Hello?
Please do, carry on.
Sorry, I'd just like to back up for a second and think about what it is that people do when they don't have a broadband connection at home. And one of the key things in our communities is library services, because they're one of the few places now you can go and get access to the internet for free. And we haven't got Wi-Fi, compatibility across vast portions of the country. So actually that's another issue. How do we fund broadband? How do we get broadband as the sort of key plank in digital accessibility and more people getting online? It is investment. It is finding the money, and I think it's not quite right to say it's a human right. I don't think. I think it is becoming that way. I do think that there's a sense that we need to involve a lot of people from a much sort of older generation into the digital accessibility agenda. And that's a key thing for us, I think, is that getting those people online is important. It's investment. We've got to put the money into it.
One example I have is that in one of the projects we've done, some of the older members of the community haven't actually had any of the services that we've been installing, but they've invested in the company, because part of what we do is get the community involved in investing. Yeah. So we found that some of the older generation want to invest in the network as a whole, so that the village stays alive and that young people stay in the village, but they don't necessarily need to use them or are happy with a very slow service that they have at the moment.
Okay, anyone else want to add in on this?
Yeah, but just a quick comment, like on paying for it. Like, I'm not entirely sure the full details because I don't study economics and stuff. But in the US system, when there was a bill introduced, so that allowed any person to get access to a telephone line for the same cost, no matter where you were in the country. Because obviously America has vast empty spaces where you have to run a line just for one person, and that was paid out of a kind of effectively a tax on your telephone bills. Every bill you had a $1 charge on it at the end of it, and that was to cover the expenses of having to install for a 30 grand line for one person who's paying $30 for it. And I'm not advocating that's the way of fixing it. A very, very small, minimal, addition to in basic internet bills to provide the investment to invest and build broadband everywhere else in the country doesn't seem like a massively huge problem that wouldn't be able to be fixed that way, especially as our country is nowhere near as big as the US's problems.
Thank you. A couple more comments online, and then I'm going to go to John and then ask you to close the debate, Sam, unless anyone else wants to tell me on the chat that they want to say something. Adam Hawks is saying that the same old solution should be used. If we want to improve a service, you get more providers who fight to improve that service and get custom for themselves. Pyro Anus, you could say that high-speed fibre optic broadband is more essential than HS2. There's a whole debate for you that we want to go down here. Dylan H, Jim K at Jim K underscore. Absolutely everyone should have access to the wealth of knowledge available online. And Dylan H Morris there. Never will I be able to erase the sound of Gareth saying YOLO. YOLO. I don't know. It was quoting. I wouldn't normally say that kind of thing. It's an outrageous sort of. It's just not me, is it? But YOLO. John.
Terrifying. Anyway, I agree completely. The key here is more providers. As for funding, I think Sam had a great idea with a slight charge generally to help us provide this, because currently, especially in Cornwall, I believe, the money is currently coming from a mixture of government and the European Regional Development Fund combined with BT. So it's a quite strange diversity of money where the funds are coming from. So I think getting more people locally to invest in it with new providers is the way to speed it up, instead of relying on a monopoly from one service provider to roll out in a particular area where they have no motivation to do it quickly or well.
Thank you very much. Anyone else before I ask Sam to close this debate? Lovely, Sam, it's all yours then.
Thank you. I think, as we've identified, I think the key point is that we need more providers. We need more physical access providers, not just the incumbent OpenReach, and that broadband should be a human right, and that's one of the things getting political. That's one of the things I'm going to be pushing for in Salford and Eccles, is getting broadband for every home in Salford and Eccles, super fast broadband.
You heard it here first. Thank you very much indeed. That brings us to the end of tonight's debates. Can I thank all of my guests, who I think are probably down here for you. I'm going to thank you, Sam, Rob, Liam, John, and Cameron, especially for jumping in at the last moment. Thank you all very much indeed for your comments, for your questions, for your challenges, for your suggestions, but we want more. You heard the issue about gender equality before. I want as many different people to appear on here as possible. If you're at all interested, please let me know. We'll reserve a place for you quite happily. We'll be back next Sunday at 8 o'clock for a regular debate. It looks like there might be enough support for us to have a one-off EU debate as well. If you're interested in taking part in that, again, let us know at Spectrum Debates. As I think our friends down here will agree, it's pretty simple. You might have the occasional computer issue, but we can sort that out in advance. I think we'd all agree, wouldn't we, that doing this is a bit of a YOLO moment, isn't it?
Yeah, I would say so.
No.
Good. Well,
I'm not saying it.
Right, well, on that score, thank you very much indeed. That's the end of our show, and we hope to see you again soon. Good night.